Welcome back to Following Noah on a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 186, and we are talking about the entirety of Elantris this week. Paul, how are you? Right as you reach for your cup.
Yes, really good. Thank you for the timing, Trevor. I was taking a little sip. I am great. I'm super excited about this. This is kind of a one-of-a-kind episode. I mentioned this before we started recording, but it's not just a book recap. It's not a normal episode. It's like I don't know. We'll figure it out along the way. I'm really excited though. So, one-of-a-kind type of episode.
Elliot, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and I bet you can't guess why.
Spurs won over the weekend.
Spurs did win. That is very exciting.
But everybody else won too, though it didn't really matter that much.
The even bigger reason why I'm doing fantastic is it is officially Girl Scout cookie season.
That's
and
a good reason.
I have already consumed my whole entire first box of Girl Scout cookies, and I am excited for the next couple of months.
Okay, what's your favorite Girl Scout cookie, though? That's the important question we need
There's
to
so
ask.
many good ones, though. I mean, Thin Mints is classic. Like, you just can't. There's others that are
okay. I'm
going to
interrupt this section of the podcast to say I cannot stand. I was driving home from work, and this person stops in the middle of the middle of the highway to talk to this person selling Girl Scout cookies right off the side of the road. They just stop, and there's like 3 cars behind me. There's a car in front of me, and then the old lady who stopped to buy Girl Scout cookies in the middle of the street just stops her car. Then the highway splits into 2 one-way lanes, and she goes the wrong way. She goes into the left lane, and it's like a one. It was a disaster, man, and it was snowing at the same time. Like, it was a event. Sorry.
Trevor's had different experiences.
Girl Scout cookies,
warm and fuzzy and sunny and happy, makes you feel good.
Elantris is...
Well, wait, hold on. I didn't get to say my favorite cookie.
Okay.
My favorite... Thin Mints are a classic. I think my favorite are I think they were called Samoas, but I think they have a different name now. I think they may have some kind of different name. I could be wrong.
Caramel Delights.
That's what they is. Caramel Delights. Yes, those are really good. Those are my favorites.
What are the peanut butter ones?
Anyways,
I don't know.
Peanut butter.
Those are like bottom tier.
I know.
What? They're the only good ones.
No, the only bad
Wow.
ones.
Trevor with the L tag tonight. Anyways.
Okay.
Elantris.
Elantris.
Yeah, there we go.
I didn't acknowledge it before, but look around you, gentlemen. We have our new art that we have commissioned surrounding us on YouTube. Yes, you can see it. Paul, you are currently pointing to some Yumi stacked bowls on the counter.
Oh, wait, so I'm like way over there then. I'm like on the other side of the screen then, aren't I?
Yes.
Am I even in frame? Okay.
No, you're in frame. You're good.
Okay, good.
So we had the opportunity to commission, thanks to our patrons, Jordy Rapture is his pen name, and we got the opportunity to work with him. He was incredible to work with. I got to email back and forth with him for several months while he worked so hard on this piece for us. He said it was extremely challenging, but he loved it. So please go support him on his socials and his channels. He is really good. He's really good Cosmere art in Stormlight and other works as well. So we were really excited that we got to work with him. He so graciously accepted this commission that we had him do. So we're going to be using this at least until Stormlight 5 comes out with our different books that we'll be covering. So there are 32 characters in the commission and 35 Easter eggs in the commission. So
good luck.
If you want to go try to search for them all, you can, Discord message in the general Discord channel. Whoever gets all 35 first, I don't know,
We'll react to your
gets
message.
a Tootsie Roll or something. I don't know.
Yeah. One side note on that, I want to say, and Trevor, you mentioned that it was a very challenging thing. I was thinking about it, and I was like, most people who do art of like a character or a person, like or maybe a scene with a couple people in it. But this is like face, hands, like all the difficult details of like so many characters. So I'm not surprised. It had to be a ton of work, and so huge thank you to Jordy for that. And I mean, yeah, and it looks fantastic. So we're really excited about that.
All right, let's roll intro, and then we can talk about Elantris. All right, Elliot, can you give us a brief summary of the entire book of Elantris for me? 3 sentences.
Brief summary of all of Elantris. Really slimy, yucky city. Magic. Invasion of the scary monks. Raoden saves the day.
Sounds good.
Nice.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, I will start this. I'm going to give a brief rating of the book. I'll give a couple highlights and then I'll throw it to you guys. You guys can do the same, and then we're just going to get right into it. I rated this book 36 out of 50. 3.5 or 3.6, technically, out of 50. I rated it fairly highly with characters, world building, and theme. Where I docked it was point of view and plot. But plot has an asterisk on it, so I will come back to that. What'd you guys rate it? Paul?
I want to go last. Is that allowed?
Okay. Elliot?
I'll happily go next. First off, I listened to the audiobook of this book, which is the first time I've done that with a Brandon Sanderson work. I don't usually do audiobooks. It's not my favorite, but just for the sake of time, I had to do that in order to fit it into my schedule. So it was a kind of a different experience for me on this one, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. A solid 42 out of 50 for me.
Okay, and I will go last. I honestly just wanted to go last because my score was the highest of this book. I gave it a whopping 44.5 out of 50. So you could say 4.5 stars out of 5. So very, very much loved this book. We're going to talk about expectations that we had going into the book, and this completely washed expectations that I had previously to the side, and I thought it was wonderful. Notably, I had my theme is a 10. The themes of this book were my favorite aspect of it. And the characters were incredible as well. I loved them all. So
Sounds good. Let's talk about your guys' preconceived notions. Paul, you mentioned that. Elantris. It's kind of, to me at least, this is how it was introduced to me back in like 2018 is when I was looking around the rest of the Cosmere outside of Stormlight and wondering what else was out there. And I meant to mention this in our Mistborn episode last week, or maybe the week before, but I never got around to it. When I read Mistborn for the first time, which would have been before Elantris, I read Stormlight, I read Stormlight again, and then I read Mistborn, and then I read Elantris. So when I read Mistborn, I texted Tim, who's been on the podcast before. Tim is the one who had read most of the Cosmere before me. He had told me about it, but I didn't really realize that until I was already halfway through it, and I was like, "Have you heard about this book?" He's like, "Yeah, I've told you about it." But when Vin, minor spoilers for the Final Empire, when Vin begins to like digest metals and use them and like use them as investiture. I didn't have a concept of like the term investiture and what that meant because I'd seen it in Stormlight, but I hadn't seen it in Mistborn yet. So when she begins to use metals, I texted Tim and I was like, hey, what if like Vin and Kaladin are like related? What if they're using the same magic? And what if Vin's secretly a Knight Radiant? And I thought it was like brilliant. And Tim responds with, well, do you know about the Cosmere? Like they are related. And I'm like, what? I had no concept of like a shared universe. I thought they were separate stories. So when I was reading Elantris, this was my first like concept of crossover magic. So I was all ready for like, okay, so what's this going to mean for this? And what's our crossover going to be? There's no crossover in Elantris. So I was pretty disappointed with my first Elantris read. All that to say, I was fairly disappointed with my first Elantris read simply because of the fact I read it with the anticipation of how does this relate to Stormlight? And it didn't at all. So I was pretty sad about it. Then on this reread, actually I've read it 3 times now. On my first reread of Elantris, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. So when it came time to do it on the podcast, I didn't want to skip it, but we also didn't really have time to cover it. So this is why we are currently doing the format we're doing. So with that being said, Paul, what were your preconceived notions of Elantris before picking it up, and how does that relate after you've set it down?
Absolutely. So we know that this was Brandon Sanderson's first book that's in the Cosmere and everything. So our understanding is that there's no crossover stuff, like maybe later on, late Stormlight, later things that Brandon has written. There's stuff where he's maybe brought Elantris back, but I wasn't really looking into this story looking for that too much because I knew there wasn't going to be anything in this story. So my expectation was that there's not any super exciting Cosmere crossover. There's nothing like super groundbreaking, as well as, I mean, it's the first Cosmere book that Brandon published, so maybe it's just not as good, not quite as engaging. He's still finding his stride, finding his rhythm, all these things, and compared to like with the experience I actually had, I just thought it was a fantastically written story, and really, really engaging for something that I feel like this style. Like I feel like if you described the style of this story to me, I wouldn't have been extremely interested in it. I would compare it a bit in style to Warbreaker. There's a lot of differences between this and Warbreaker, but I feel like it's a bit of a similar flavor. Of some like political intrigue and things like that. And I thought it was riveting. I thought the dialogue was extremely well written and there was a lot of clever back and forth. We'll talk about that more later. But that was kind of my general premise, was honestly, I feel like everything I've heard is like, yeah, okay, yeah, Elantris, it's good to read it, it's in the Cosmere. Like, I feel like that's the general consensus I've heard about it. But I was just delightfully surprised with how enjoyable it was, the themes of the book, the characters. I even really enjoyed the world itself. I think that was my lowest rating, actually, was world building. I gave a 7 out of 10. Not because the world wasn't good, but I just don't think world building was the main point of it. It was, but we'll talk about it more. The whole Aeon door thing and the line on the Aeons wasn't my favorite like story point, but I still think it was I think this is a very cool world. I loved this world itself. I thought it was really fascinating, but there were parts I didn't love that came in. But anyways, that's kind of my brief comparison of what I thought it might be and briefly what it actually was for me.
What about you, Elliot?
Kind of similar story. as I've gotten into the Cosmere fandom over the last few years, I just picked up on a few general impressions about Elantris, and almost all of them were kind of what Paul said. It's, oh yeah, you got to read that to fill out your Cosmere checklist, and a few good things to say about it, a few, you know, kind of grudging shrugs. So I came into this book with, I think, lower expectations than I have for a lot of other books. Mistborn gets talked up a lot. Stormlight gets talked up a whole bunch. This one gets talked down, and so at least from the folks that I've mainly talked to, so it really exceeded those expectations, and maybe that was exactly the right way to go in, was to not have high expectations and then be pleasantly surprised with a really charming story with some engaging, really likable characters. And I completely agree with you again, Paul, on the themes. Really, really uplifting story of these characters who are in really terrible situations in a lot of the time, but who manage to make something of it, and who decide that they're not going to let the situation get them down, and they're going to fight, and they're going to bring purpose to their lives and the lives of those around them. It was a really good story. I really enjoyed it.
Let's start with characters.
Do you have anything specific, or can I start us off?
All you.
Okay. This I want to talk about Serene first.
Okay.
So Serene is our woman protagonist here. Her and Raoden are kind of like the two main protagonists. One thing I want to say is what distinguishes this book for me, and what made it really good, was how Serene's chapters were used in combination with Raoden's to, one, be engaging, and to, two, world build pretty well. Serene is new to this kingdom that she's in. She's come here to be wed to Raoden. Raoden is taken by the Sheod, all this stuff, you know, Raoden's not there. But she has a knowledge of this city. She's very smart and very up to date on all the important people, important places. But we still see from her little comments of what's different from her home. And so I feel like it gives us perspective into this place as a reader being introduced to this place ourselves. We see her, you know, pointing out things that's new to us, so I appreciate her pointing it out, while also, like, kind of acknowledging things as either weird or abnormal or normal, I guess, based off of her experience that she has where she grew up, you know, down yonder, you know, a ways away. That's the world building comment. About the, like, enjoyment of it, I feel like this is similar in style to the very beginning of Stormlight. You know, Kaladin and Shalon are the two characters you meet, and they're totally separate, you know, and you switch back and forth. What I didn't love about Stormlight, and I've talked about this for a long time, is I felt like the world building chapters in Stormlight kind of drug along for me. Like, it felt slower. You know, it was nice information, but ultimately, like, I even described them as unnecessary whenever we did our recap of The Way of Kings, I think, way back in the day. This, I think, is good, because, like, really, really good, because the story and the, like, the debate and the intrigue and stuff that I think is going on is really engaging. I thought it was very clever. I don't know how much that would hold up in a rereader standpoint compared to The Way of Kings, which I've made that comparison. I think The Way of Kings probably has better reread value. But it was very engaging, very exciting, and Serene is probably my favorite woman that Brandon Sanderson has written. She's incredibly smart and witty and just great, like, great all around. I thought really enjoyable. I thought she was a perfectly balanced, like, humor, wit versus cleverness versus kindness, all the things. I just thought she was a really stand-up character, one of my favorites.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yes.
I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but I wonder if being a fast reader on Elantris versus a chapter by chapter reader and everything else we've covered would influence you on that. I wonder if so right now is the first time we've ever got to talk about Elantris, and you have the whole arc. You have the whole story arc of Serene, you have the whole story arc of Raoden. And when we started The Way of Kings, Shallan got on your nerves. Like her witty self. I got fairly heavy early Shallan vibes from Serene for the start of this book. By the end of this book, I think she's great. Totally agree with you. But I wonder if we went chapter by chapter, if you might have gotten a little annoyed by her jabs at the king or her playful banter with the generals in the secret meetings that they were having behind the king's back. So I wonder if that affects you at all.
That is a fair point. I will say, while I haven't read this book chapter by chapter, I am now not crazy far, but I'm probably almost through part 2 of The Way of Kings on a reread. And I think even rereading, like just going ahead, there is some more stuff I'm tuning into, but I still feel the same way, I think, about a lot of the Shallan chapters. It still feels like it feels slow to me. It feels dry. It is a different, there's different scenarios going on. So this isn't a direct comparison, but the style and I guess the amount of world building in the chapter versus story progression was different. One other distinction I want to make between Serene and Shallan is I feel like a lot of Serene's poking and prodding and wittiness, while it is very like akin to how Shallan does it, I feel like it's way more story driven, where Shallan is like that's who she is, if that makes sense. Serene is very much like poking and prodding all these people, but to get something out of it intentionally.
Serene's more tactical.
Yes, yeah, more tactical with what she's saying, and I think that's one of the things I respect about her. I also want to say that the only other point I have on this, then I'm going to hand over the mic, is Raoden's chapters. I'm not going to talk about Raoden in depth right now, but Raoden's chapters also contribute a lot to the world building, and I feel like it was well balanced in that sense. I think part of the reason, the issue maybe that I've had, and I say issue, it's not a major issue. I love The Way of Kings, but part of the thing is I feel like it's a big imbalance, in my opinion, of like Shallan chapters are very heavy world building, and the Kaladin chapters are way more heavy on action. And I feel like this is maybe more balanced, I guess. I don't know if I can put my finger on that, but I felt like it was a good balance of learning about the magic system with Raoden, learning kind of about the political side with Serene. And yeah, I don't know if I can put my finger on it, but it just really worked for me. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's very cleverly written.
What about you, Elliot?
I would echo a lot of what Paul just said and add to it. While Raoden and Serene, I agree, balance each other well in the structure of their chapters, the types of personalities that they have. I think Hrathen is also a nice foil to those as well. So having the 3 different point of views and consistently rotating between the 3 of them, while if this was a longer book, like a Stormlight, that might have gotten a little bit monotonous. In the time that we had, I think it worked nicely because but before you could get, annoyed with Serene or bored with Raoden, you were jumping to Hrathen and kind of switching the perspective on it all and being inside the mind of the villain or the sort of villain. So it was, it worked for me too.
So here's what I'll add here. Paul, I'm not sure if you noticed this or anyone who's read this for the first time noticed this. He rotates between Raoden to Serene to Hrathen. To Raoden to Serene to Hrathen, strict. Like, there is 0 deviation. There's a Raoden chapter, there's a Serene chapter, there's a Hrathen chapter. And all 3 chapters are supposed to be happening simultaneously. So Raoden leads like a day, and then you'll see Sereni's that same day, and then you'll see Hrathen that same day. And it works. I agree with you, Elliot. It works here. It would not work in Stormlight because it's too long. There's going to be too much downtime. In this book, I think, and maybe we'll talk about Hrathen now and Raoden last, but I think Hrathen is almost really good. I think he's really close to being like a really good character. He has an arc at the end of the book that almost lands, not quite for me. Like it kind of hit home on the second time. I remember on the first time reading this, I'm like, why does this character get redemption? I completely lost it on my first read. I was not on board with it. On my second read, and on my third read, I did appreciate it. And I think it's just a little bit of naive writing from Sanderson of he didn't quite set it up correctly. And I'm really glad that it's there because that type of character is something that, you know, as you've read more Sanderson, you can then view it in a chronological order and say, oh, he's gotten a lot better at this as he's gone through these other titles that I've read. But on Hrathen, I think he drops the ball a little bit, and it's because I think it's because of the format. There's some chapters where we'll go to Hrathen and he's not really doing much. But if he would cut down on Hrathen chapters and then really set up the redemption at the end, the time that we spend with Hrathen is really focused on a storyline as opposed to kind of just. I felt Hrathen was a filler chapter. I'll go ahead and throw the term out there. There were several chapters with Hrathen where he's kind of just hanging out with the Elantris guards or on top of the Elantris wall looking at the city. Like there were several times where we would jump to Hrathen and I'd be bored. But that's because Raoden and Sereni were so engaging to me.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Hrathen a bit. So I see what you're saying, Trevor, and I think I can put my finger on what would have made it more of a payoff at the end. So Hrathen is this weird ground. So he portrays to the people, to others, that he's a good guy, let's say. He has this facade of being a good guy, and we as the readers see kind of behind the curtain that maybe he's not good. It's very fishy, very not right. You know, like we know it's not good what he's doing, but then we see him kind of in other situations or with, there's the scene where they try to like kill the Elantrian.
Yeah.
Right. And he kind of is like, he's very against it. He's like, not now, there may be a time for this, but it's not now. We're not going to do that now. He never really had a fully maniacal, fully evil moment that I feel like would have made I wouldn't call this a redemption arc. It's more of a happenstance arc, I feel like, of things. But I feel like if we knew Hrathen to be more like evil to the core, then maybe there would have been a different like feeling towards him as he kind of. It's not really like he allies with the good guys. It's he unites against the bad guy because he can agree that he's bad, kind of thing.
Right. So Hrathen, his whole time, he's trying to save not necessarily Elantrian or the Elantrians, but what's the nation that they're in? Man, I audiobooked, so I can't think of these terms.
Elantris.
No, like Elantris is the city, but
Uh-huh.
what's the country that they're in? I don't remember. So Hrathen is. I'll look it up here in a second. Hrathen is trying to save them. He knows that his evil cult guys are gonna come wipe these guys off the face of the earth if he doesn't save them, like if he doesn't convert them. And I do think Hrathen's a really interesting character because he believes in his religion, and he's trying to. He's there as a priest. He's trying to convert people to his religion, but he's also scared of his own religion, that they're going to come slaughter everybody if they don't convert. So at the end, when he realizes that this is wrong, and he saves Serene, that I think that is a really good character. I just wish it had been set up a little bit better. But it feels a little out of the blue to me.
So one other thing I want to say about Hrathen and why I enjoyed his chapters is because I think if we just had, if you took out the Hrathen chapters, or like the majority of the Hrathen chapters, then you would have had Serene and Raiden, and it would have just kind of been like okay, when are our protagonists going to meet? When are they going to kiss? You know, like what? I don't know. Like what's going to happen? I feel like having the Hrathen chapters are like it's what added the intrigue for me. It was seeing that there was something twisted, something evil, something not right in the story at hand to kind of add the suspense. And Hrathen was the vessel to like add all the twists that I think made the plot really interesting. Of like, I for one like kind of gasped. I think it's maybe at the very end of part 1, because everything is really mellow in part 1, and part 1 is half the book, which is
more than
wild.
Half.
Yeah. And then at the end, it's like, I don't know if this is the very last words, but essentially right at the end of part 1, he like gets this poison or potion or whatever and like downs it, right? Isn't that right at the end of part 1?
Yeah.
And I was just like, wait. I probably was naive on it. I was like, did he just kill himself? But no, he like, you know, impersonated the Sheod, all this, you know, there was a lot of stuff with that. But that was kind of like the vessel, I feel like, in the story for plot twists and for these like big turns to really add like an intensity and things, which I really liked. Personally, I liked I gave point of view a 9 because I liked kind of the steady back and forth. I didn't actually catch on that it was like that formulaic of like always like Raid and Serene, Hrathen like on repeat. But keeping it to those characters, since it wasn't a super long story, it was more normal length. This felt like doing the necessities right, if you will. Instead of being super, like, Stormlight is very big and elaborate, and there's a lot of delicately woven pieces. This was more like your bare bones, but like really well done, I think, and so I appreciated that.
Arelon. That's the nation.
Arelon.
Arelon.
Yes.
Well, while we're talking about Hrathen, I did want to say there was one thing about him. I'll weigh in on the turn at the end maybe in a second, but there was one thing about him that frustrated me slightly, and that was when you were in his perspective, it felt like he was the evil mastermind genius guy, like, oh wow, he's such a planner, he's good at strategy. But then when you look back on it and you reflect on all these scenarios, he really just gets outsmarted by everyone. Serene beats him at every turn. Delof beats him at every turn. He really just loses the entire book until the very end when he flips and
when he dies.
Yeah. And
so he loses again.
and in a way, and I don't know, on reflection, I was almost a little disappointed that he talks a good game. He seems like he's a formidable bad guy, but as far as results go, he was kind of incompetent through most of the book.
I guess if you put it that way, I agree with you. I like you said, as you're reading it, you don't feel that way.
No,
But when you look at the scoreboard, there's a 0 next to his name. That's for sure.
I'm not quite sure how that shapes my view of him, but it was like you were watching a sports team do everything right and then lose anyway.
It's injuries. They're just injuries, man. They'll get it next year.
Right. It just had there were little excuses like, oh yeah, Serene's the hero, so she has to win, right? But oh man, Hrathen had a great evil mastermind plan. I don't know. I wrote in my notes, is this guy just kind of incompetent? I don't know. On the twist, just to wrap up our thoughts on Hrathen so we can move on to other things. I'm with what you were talking about, Trevor, earlier, in that I'm not quite sure it lands for me, and maybe that's because I'm on my first reread or my first read, as you were talking about. I almost would lean in a different direction than you were talking about. I don't know if I need more lead in. I need more digest time afterwards. It just happened all so quickly, and it felt like, and maybe this is, we're reading the book faster, and I did on audiobook, and it's all just different, but the time spent from the revelation of he has made a decision to switch sides, kills Dilaf, to book is over, was really fast. And there was a lot of other big things in there that I was trying to digest and understand as well. So I felt like the mental bandwidth I was able to allocate to processing what just happened with Hrathen was very small and didn't allow me to appreciate it. And so it felt a little bit whiplashy at times. Probably one of my bigger criticisms of the book, actually. I talked about how I loved it. That might be the thing I don't like about it the most, is that Hrathen whiplash at the end.
I'll let you talk here in a second, Paul. Once, a little bit later in the episode, when we open this up to the rest of the Cosmere and directly compare it, I do want to talk about, and because also we've just read Mistborn, I do want to talk about early Sanderlanches versus later Sanderlanches. I want to compare with you guys a little bit later in this episode an early Brandon Sanderson end of the book to a later Brandon Sanderson end of the book, because I think there's a really interesting comparison and how he's moved. You guys want to talk about Raoden? All right, our hero for the book. So, something I didn't really realize on my first read versus my second read was, well, the entirety of this book is you have 3 characters thrown into a really weird situation, and all 3 of them are trying to make the best out of their weird situation. That's the book. You have Hrathen, who's a part of creepy cult, and he's been told to convert everybody, so he's going to make the best with that situation. You have Serene, who has arrived for a wedding. Her fiancé is dead, and now she's stuck. So now what? So she's going to make the best of her situation. You have Raoden, who has died and is thrown into Zombie City, and then he makes the best of his situation. So I really enjoyed that concept of Raoden being thrown into hell and then getting to work. That's the book. He is just trying to make sense and make the best of the setting around him for himself and for everyone else. I really enjoyed what Brandon Sanderson did with Raoden.
So this is kind of cheating, I feel like, when we're going to talk about Raoden's character. Maybe it's not cheating, but in the, I think it was the postscript of the book kind of thing, Brandon Sanderson says, just kind of was what if I wrote in just an all-around good guy, pretty point blank. I think I mentioned this in one of my live reactions earlier while I was reading this at the start. I was like, Raoden is just good. He's like kind of too good. Like,
Yeah.
when's going to be the part where he like makes mistakes or gives up or like, I don't know, things like that, you know? And he just kind of did it. He was just great, respectable, honorable. And a lot of the things that he does champions why I rated the theme here for this book a 10 out of 10. I think the lessons, the traits at hand are fantastic. I'm gonna actually scroll through the outline because I wrote kind of a list of them. But I think some of the ones that Raiden specifically examples is like hope, perseverance, kindness, selflessness, hard work, and there's many more. Like just all these wonderful features, and it's really nice to see it in action and to see how his actions uplift like a lot of the Elantrians and all the things there. I feel like I did one thing I will say, and this may be a little bit why I docked the plot a little bit of points in my rating. I will say, to a point, if it feels a bit unrealistic, right? You know, like Raiden is very exemplary, very perfect of like a guy, like just all around so good, and he kind of gains control of Elantris by just being a great guy, everyone respecting him and following him, and it felt a bit cheesy in reality. I loved it, but it did feel a bit cheesy and a bit unrealistic. And I feel like I had to have a little bit of reading this story. I got to just really run through it. You know, it's not often that we get to just read through a book like all the way before talking about it. And I think that helped me a bit with that, maybe. But I feel like I got to just kind of suspend any disbelief of like, no, this wouldn't actually work out so nicely for Raiden. I just got to enjoy a really great all-around character. And Raiden, throughout the story, the way he handles all sorts of things, conflict and everything, he just like really shot up as one of my favorite characters ever. Like, I think he's fantastic, just all around wonderful. So, anyways, those are my thoughts on Raiden. I'm curious to know what y'all think, because he's like kind of the poster child of this story. Ultimately, you know, him and Sereni are the main characters, but Raiden's probably like the primary one. You know,
I think Raiden was my favorite character of the book for sure. And I think he's solidly top 5 in the Cosmere at this point. There are not many other characters that I think top Raiden for me right now. And it's for all those things that you talked about, Paul. He shows a lot of really inspirational attitude towards everything that's happening to him. He's been dealt a really short stick and he's kind of gotten unlucky. And Trevor, you said it, he gets to work. That's who he is. I'm gonna help the people around me. I'm gonna put my shoulder to the grindstone and just make my situation better. And I find that really encouraging to read a character like that who is in a really tough place and doesn't give up, keeps going. I wanted to read one quote that's kind of early on in the book, but I thought it summed up Raiden and a lot of this book for me pretty well. It's Raiden and Galadon talking. They have a lot of really good dialogue, by the way.
They do.
The two of them. I laughed out loud as I was driving on my commute at some of the banter between the two of them. It was really clever at times. But this is early on. They're talking about, you know, what they're doing. Galadon's still trying to get kind of a read on Raiden, I think, and he's trying to figure out what Raoden's motive is, and Raoden kind of comes out with it. Raoden shook his head. Galadon, that is just a tiny part of it. No one accomplishes anything in Elantris. They're all either too busy squabbling over food or contemplating their misery. The city needs a sense of purpose. We're dead, Suli, Galadon said. What purpose can we have besides suffering? That's exactly the problem. Everyone's convinced that their lives are over just because their hearts stop beating. That's usually a pretty good indication, Sully, Galadon said dryly. Not in our case, my friend. We need to convince ourselves that we can go on. The Sheod isn't causing all the pain here. I've seen people on the outside lose hope too, and their souls end up just as emaciated as those poor wretches in the square. If we can restore even a tiny bit of hope to these people, then their lives will improve drastically. And they go on and chatting and, bantering back and forth, of course. But like that summed it up for me. He just wants to improve the lives of those around him. If everybody in the world thought that way, it'd be a fantastic place.
Yeah.
The world would be so much better if people thought like Raoden.
And he inspires that in a lot of the people.
Yeah.
Like we see that carried out throughout the book and through the hope of Elantris, I would argue, which we'll talk about later. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that Raoden is one of your favorite Cosmere characters. Whenever I finished the book, I told my wife, I said that Raoden, I did say the name. I said Raoden is like the top 3 Cosmere character for me. Like absolute, instantly shot up to my favorites and just outstanding. One thing I also want to mention, this is maybe my last point on characters in general. So you talked about Galadon and Raoden's like banter. You have Serene and like the way she helps a lot of the other like women in the story, and you have her and her uncle and that family there. Like I think I rated characters for this book as a perfect 10 out of 10. I think that considering like this isn't Stormlight length, and this is like one book, but I think the way that the main characters were used and the supporting cast like plays in so well, I think it was marvelously done. I think I had actual attachment to Galadon. I had attachment to, I feel bad. I can't remember the name of the uncle, which I'm saying I had attachment to.
Yeah.
Keine?
Keine. That's right. I thought Keine was awesome, and like at the end, like later, whenever it's like revealed that he had this like, I don't know, kind of pirate past,
Yes.
Like I took that like big, it wasn't like okay, no, I don't really care about that guy. I don't really know who he is. Like Keine is really cool, and we see like we get good perspective into him and his family and all these characters throughout the book in like such a quick, easy way, I guess. That it's not like, oh, I needed all, like, I didn't have, like, flashbacks on all these other characters, which I think is fantastic and would be really cool to see with some of these characters. But, I think the main characters and the way that the supporting characters were used, I think was just wonderful. And like, it fit perfectly in this book, in the length of the book.
And any spelling guesses on Keine, gentlemen? Ellie, do you know?
I do, because I had to cheat and look it up.
All right, Paul.
I specifically didn't look at any of the recaps that you sent because I didn't want to see. But I do know most of them. I don't know Keine's.
Good luck.
Oh dear. I was gonna just go basic because I went way over the top. If y'all were looking at my
after you get the first guess wrong, I'll tell you how many letters there are.
Okay, with that clue, I'm gonna say K I N E.
Wow.
Wow.
Incorrect. There are 4 letters.
Oh, is it Kine?
No, it's Kiin.
Kiin. Okay.
Keine.
Whenever you mentioned it, whenever you mentioned that it was really short, that completely changed my guess. I would not have guessed it like that. But when you said that, I thought about what if it was literally just spelled like Kine or something like that. Anyways, that's wild. Keine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought they were all wonderful. Like I actually felt attachment to the minor characters, which I feel like I don't normally have that level of attachment towards the supporting cast in these books.
For for all you listening and watching, for you to fully enjoy this outline that I have in front of me, Paul has written, I really liked our two main characters. They seem nearly without fault. Tsarini. Tsareenie. Tsarini.
Can I explain myself? Do I get to respond to these allegations?
Lower. Elliot has correctly spelled it because he cheated, and has spelled it Sarene. Tsarini. In Arelon, I'm pretty sure you kind of just say every single letter that you see. There's 0 things that are silent. So like all the E's and the I's are all said, and they're hard vowels. They're not like hidden or silent or anything. So
I did my best. I'm used to the crazy Roshar spell checks, so I gave it my best. Also, the only thing I had to go off of, and this is kind of exposing me, and maybe I still misspelled it, but I grew up on Pokemon, and there's a Pokemon out there named Serene. So that's what I went with. I wasn't expecting it to be the word serene, or close to the word serene.
yeah.
And I also realized, whenever I listen to Hope of Elantris, it's a different audiobook reader. Hope of Elantris is read by Michael Kramer again, I believe. And it was totally a throw off for me of trying to remember who was who, because it was all pronounced different. It was like Serene and like Rowden, I think was how he said Raiden. Anyways. So yes, I misspelled it all. I'm sorry.
Before we move on to talk about the Sanderlanche, there was one other thing throughout the story I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on. This was a very religiously packed book.
Yeah.
It really revolved around the religions of these different people, both past and present. There were so many different religions that were being referenced. The people were acting according to their faith. It was part of the politics. It was huge. I couldn't help but get a little stuck on the fact, though, that the person who seems to have by far the most religious faith is the villain, Hrathen.
Yeah.
Our heroes, the hero who you would think would be the protagonist, maybe the one with the most faith, not really. It was just like a political tool for them. Or, oh yeah, I'm from this city, so therefore I'm this religion. And there was even a point in the story where, oh gosh, Hrathen contacts Serene's father, who I don't remember what his name was.
I'll find it.
But he threatens her. He says, I forget the details exactly. I think this is when Serene is in Elantris, because he poisoned her with the same thing that he faked himself. And he basically says, I can save your daughter if you convert to my religion.
Eventio.
And Eventio, he doesn't even think twice. He doesn't even spend 1 minute thinking about it. The answer is, oh, yeah, okay, I'll convert, save my daughter. And I just shook my head at, I get it. His daughter's just been threatened on her life. But to discard your religious faith so quickly,
yeah, it
just struck me as, yeah, you didn't actually believe any of it, did you? That was just a, oh yeah, this is my culture. This is my how I was raised. And the casual way a lot of the characters approached their religious faith was a little shocking to me at times. Thoughts?
Yes, thoughts. So that's a really good point about Eventio instantly casting that aside. That is a bit questionable, but I can't quote anything to you, but I feel pretty confident that Serene is like, she's kind of in anguish or would be in anguish about it because she knows he would just say yes to whatever in order to save her, kind of thing. Doesn't matter what you say, like, I don't know, $1 million, like, don't care. Yes, or like, whatever the thing may be. The religion is totally different from currency, but the thing with religion in this book, I was a little surprised with how huge of a focal point religion is in this book, actually. But I feel like what we see, one from our protagonists, two from Hrathen, and I guess just kind of passively through the other characters, is this religion specifically is just like a big... This specific religion is a big bust. It's these like monks, and at least the way that I feel like it was talked about throughout the whole book of, Hrathen talks about he used to be devout, and this used to be like a passion for him, and he was very driven after it and things like that. And now it's more of like a logical debate, more of a logical thing in his head than it is like a relationship or a religion. But I mean, I don't know. I'm curious to get y'all's perspective on it. My perspective reading this book was from all the Hrathen chapters and all the stuff, all the tactics he uses, and seeing behind like what he's thinking versus what he's saying, as well as seeing the others involved in this religion. Feels like this whole religion in this story in Elantris is all centered around like militaristic domination, and I don't know. I feel like it's not a real religion. I feel like that's the characters that we have. They're like pulling up these original manuscripts to show that everyone had been deceived, kind of thing. So that was my understanding of it, was that the whole thing was maybe not a sham, but just not right.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this. And this feeds into something I wanted to bring up earlier after a further Cosmere spoiler thing. So I'll try to keep it brief, and then we'll revisit this later. Yes, that also struck me, Elliot, and how flippant, if that's a good word for it, a lot of these characters are with their religion. However, I think it's an interesting concept that 10 years before the story started, their religion let them down. What they believed in turned into a curse, and now they are beginning to question everything they've been taught. And society has then shaped a lot the last 10 years over, okay, now why is God cursing us instead of blessing us? Elantris is supposed to be heaven. Now it's garbage, right? So I'm really curious about Elantris 2. You guys were talking about how good Raoden is, and how top 5, top 10, top 3, whatever you said, Cosmere character Raoden. He's not there for me. I mean, he's certainly top 10. I doubt he's top 5 for me. He's probably between 6 and 10. However, for extremely great potential in sequels, Raoden is really up there. Because moving forwards past this book, I think Sanderson could really explore some cool things. I want like a Raoden and Serene young parent setting. Like in 5 or 8 years where they're young parents trying to raise their kids in this new society that they're trying to cultivate, or the old society that they've recovered. I think that's a really interesting concept. And Raoden and Serene, as we've talked about, are just all around two good people. They're good people. And so having them at the helm of Elantris moving forwards, that's a really cool concept moving forwards. So I think the potential for Raoden is incredible. I don't, and I think that's kind of how I feel about this book in general, is the concept that Brandon Sanderson had for this book and the world that he had in his brain, the characters that he had in his brain are great. Like some of the best in fantasy, and the fact that this was his first book and able to get those thoughts across on page successfully is incredible. I think he missed the mark a little bit in the payoff and the execution of those characters that he had in his head. However, with the news last year in the State of the Sanderson that he's planning on revisiting Elantris and writing Elantris 2 and Elantris 3 in the foreseeable future, that's awesome. I mean, I wasn't that excited when I read that, but I have since read Elantris twice since reading the State of the Sanderson of 2023. Now I'm excited. I would definitely be excited for an Elantris sequel, and I'm really curious what he does with it. Like, is this a direct Raoden Sereni sequel, or is this Raoden and Sereni's daughter, or is this is their daughter the main character and they're passed on, or what does the sequel look like? I'm actually really curious to know that. I think Elantris has incredible potential, just not quite reached in this first book.
Okay, I've been thinking about something while you're saying that, Trevor, and still thinking a lot about what Elliot was saying, kind of with the religious side. So there's, in on Roshar, there's Vorinism, and maybe others. I don't remember off the top of my head. In Mistborn, there's a lot of talk with different religions on the world and stuff like that. I feel like Brandon Sanderson would have. He could leave that off. He could leave that as a book one thing, or he could pick that up and try to expand upon it more and have our characters kind of, I don't know, maybe wrestle with that more, like what was wrong and what's right, with the religion in Elantris. Or I think it's also perfectly acceptable to just leave that, like that doesn't have to be a major point. Like, that could have been a book one thing, or it could be a major thing. Like, its pseudo becomes a bigger thing in Mistborn, but I don't know, kind of complicated. Like, I feel like this book had a different relationship with that in general. Religion and fantasy, I think, is a touchy topic in general. Like, that's challenging. You probably don't want to write that. Like, I can say, like, just very briefly from like personal experience, like, I was a bit uncomfortable with kind of a lot of the like religious talk in here. Like, personally, I'm a faithful Christian, and I think that it made me a bit uncomfortable, but I was just kind of like, this is fantasy, this is a story, let's just enjoy the story kind of thing. Like, this isn't about religion, right?
Yeah.
It's a story element in a fantasy setting, which I think is awesome. And I think he could explore that, but like I said, I feel like that's a touchy subject to try and make a big focal point of your book. But I really like what you're saying, Trevor, and I've never thought about a book with kind of that setting of like if Raoden and Sereni were kind of young parents. I think that would be awesome. Like you said, I feel like it would be a fun opportunity to experience kind of a heartfelt family setting, which we don't get. And like I think they would be the best characters to kind of have that setting in the Cosmere. I think would be really fun. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know where I would go with an Elantris 2 and 3. Like, is it the same monks that are like the evil? Is there more like large scale shard level implications here? We can talk about that later potentially. I unironically don't know the answer to that. I haven't looked into anything outside of the main story here, but yeah, I would love book 2 and 3. I've loved this book, but I don't know exactly where he would go with it, what the plan would be.
You want my prediction for Elantris 2 and 3?
I do.
Yes.
I'm cheating slightly and dipping into Arcanum Unbounded in prep for this. I actually went and reread The Emperor's Soul and the brief, like, one-page description of the cell system that we're in.
Mhm.
And there's a comment in there that talks about the cell system and the cultures there being a little bit more, I forget, it's not quite phrased this way, but basically Cosmere aware than other planets are.
At the time. Go ahead.
You're gonna derail my theory in a second here with your words of Brandon knowledge or wherever you're about to throw. But
Go ahead.
based on what I've read, there's a comment there about the cell system being perhaps a little more Cosmere aware. I wonder if Elantris 2 and 3 is going to lean into that. What if we pick up with Raoden and Sereni's kids and we travel? We go to other planets. We spend a book, which I haven't seen so far, visiting other places, and actually maybe one of their kids is a world hopper or whatever, else it is, and we can, maybe go on a little bit more Cosmere aware journey with with the knowledge they have.
All right, I'll give you some more knowledge, and you can revise your theory slightly. Your theory's fine. It's just you need to add a couple greats. Elantris predates the rest of the Cosmere by a wide margin. Okay. So when that excerpt in Arcanum Unbounded is written about Cell, it is a lot later than Elantris.
And the events of Elantris. Okay.
So Raoden and Sereni don't know about the Cosmere, more or less. They might be about to, like, and 2 and 3 might be about that, like learning that. But at the time of Elantris, they're not that Cosmere aware. And at the time of Arcanum Unbounded, writing about Cell, they are. Does that make sense?
It does. What about the Emperor's Soul, though?
I don't know.
And I ask because in the Emperor's Soul, Shay does have some pretty good knowledge of Shy, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Shy. Sorry. Shy has some pretty good knowledge of the magic she's using. She knows about stuff that's going on, and if those are similar time frames, maybe we start to see some more interaction between their cultures, and it blossoms into a knowledge of investiture in the Cosmere and their capabilities, and maybe we see the age of exploration, perhaps, where they venture into the cognitive realm and head off to other places, something like that.
Sure.
Elantris 2 and 3.
Yeah. And just off the top of my head, I believe Emperor's Soul is after Mistborn Era 1. So a lot more current Cosmere events, like closer to Mistborn Era 2, like Stormlight era, that type of time slot, I believe, is when Emperor's Soul is. I could be wrong though. This is going back to our Cosmere 101 episode. When we read those Arcanum Unbounded excerpts, do you remember me telling you who wrote those?
Her name is Chris, right? That's about all I know.
Yeah, her name is Chris, and she's from Taldane, the planet where White Sand is on, the bright side sand planet, the dark side sand planet, which we read briefly. She's from that planet. Keep her in mind. She might make an appearance on the podcast shortly.
I didn't know we were having new guests. That's cool.
Yes, I need to redo.
I bet she'd be really good at the Cosmere trivia.
Either that or not very good if she's a ferrochemist, or not a ferrochemist. What's the one? Yeah, ferrochemist, where she dumps all of her memories in a copper mine that doesn't need to remember them.
That's fair.
All right. I want to talk about the ending of this book. The Sanderlanche or Elantris detracts from the book. That's my claim. Would you agree or disagree?
For me, it's a solid agree in the way that it's done, not necessarily the events that happen. And I feel like if I was actually an author or had taken classes on writing or knew more of what I was talking about in that arena, I might be able to explain why. I don't know that I can explain why. I can't quite put my finger on it. But there's something about this Sanderlanche that doesn't feel nearly as smooth or well delivered or digestible. It feels like I watched the movie 75% of the way, and then someone sat on the remote and it hit fast forward, and then all of a sudden the movie was over. And that was it. We didn't get, I couldn't find the remote, so I couldn't rewind and go back. It was just like, done. And I'm doing this book differently because I did it on an audiobook. So I really, to give you a fair perspective, I should go reread like at least the Sanderlanche with the physical copy of the book that I do have in my hand right now. But it felt rushed.
For the record, Elliot and I have the same version.
Look at that.
Copies.
Ruin hasn't gotten to this one.
Okay, I will say, I wouldn't go far to say it detracts from the story, but I do think, I mean, it feels like this was the first Sanderlanche that he wrote, you know. It feels like he wrote this one, and, you know, next time, you know, I really enjoy cooking. The first time I cook a new recipe, like, it's just not going to be what it should be, you know. Like, there's a lot of things that are wrong. Either I burnt something or didn't cook something, you know. There's a lot of things wrong. And the second time, I feel like you get it. You're like, okay, I know what I did wrong last time. I can fix this. Let me just have a do-over. It kind of felt like that to me. It felt like the initial growing pains. You're right. It felt a bit quick. It didn't feel like it was this crazy hot, like, big payoff. I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was good, but I fully understand what you're saying. Like, I can mostly agree. I don't think it detracts, but it was definitely not what I think of as Sanderlanche tier. You know, it wasn't groundbreaking. You know,
I'll save my comparison for a second here, where we're going to full Cosmere spoilers, or at least full what we've read Cosmere spoilers, which is pretty much everything except for Mistborn Era 2 at this point and the last year's publications. But I need more process time than what was given to me in Elantris. I need it, and I don't mean like setting down the book and processing it. I need the characters to be in a room talking to each other about what happened. And I don't know why I need that, but I need that. I don't like I'm not a literary student. I don't understand and critique English as a language or as an art for a living. But I need, and this is something that I always bring back to the Way of Kings. The Way of Kings, the story is over at the end of part 4. There's a whole part 5, there's 7 chapters at the end of The Way of Kings that is just different characters in a room talking. There's some reveals, there's some plot reveals, there's some, you know, some teasers for the Words of Radiance, stuff like that. I need that type of thing in a book for me to be able to successfully wrap it up and understand it in my head. The end of Elantris, we get 2 chapters of Hrathen's funeral and them hanging out in Elantris. I guess the hope of Elantris. The hope of Elantris, you could argue, serves its purpose. Elliot, you're shaking your head.
It's more screen time, but it doesn't answer the questions that you're it doesn't give you that processing. I agree with Elliot's head shake. I
Hope
don't
of
think that
Elantris
does this job.
Hope of Elantris is more interlude
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
than denouement or whatever the French word is for that after the
How do you
climax.
spell that? Denouement?
Just how it sounds, Trevor.
The final part of the play, a narrative in which the strands of the plot are drawn together and matters are explained or resolved.
That
Thank you.
Wow.
I learned something today.
Hope of Elantris doesn't do that for me. It's separate. It's in kind of and while you were gone, this happened sort of thing. I'm with you. I need to know how the characters perceived what just happened. I can sit and process how I perceived it, but I'm left with too many simple questions, like not big plot questions, more like, well, how did Raoden feel after that? Or and how did that affect Raoden and Serene's relationship? Kind of those simple, where does this leave our characters types of things. I think I would categorize this in the personal preference side of things for me. Is it okay for an author to leave us a little bit hanging or to get us all excited and close the story and then just kind of, boom, end it? I think that's a style choice, and it's probably an okay one. I'm 100% with you, though, Trevor. I personally want to decompress with the characters and get my denouement with them.
I just think it's funny. The concept of, at the end of Elantris, Raoden has just learned how to teleport across the world.
Yeah.
And we don't get any processing time of any implication of that. Like, we don't know how we feel about that. Serene can go visit her dad whenever she wants to now. I want a scene of characters, processing.
Galadon's got some witty things to say about everything that happened, and give me that scene.
Okay, Paul, I'm going to throw you under the bus again. If you're watching on YouTube, listening on YouTube, tab over to us. Pause in a second. How did Paul spell Sion on the outline? Go. Put it in the comments. Okay. On Paul, on the outline, you have Siones. Sion.
Yeah.
Would you like to take another shot at it?
Okay, knowing what I have kind of learned about the spelling on this planet, which I don't formally agree with. I'm guessing it's more of like an SEON.
There you go.
Okay.
On your second try, you got it.
Nice. I haven't been taking the vowels so literally, but they're very literal in this.
Yes,
in this
they
world.
are.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, if you have not read everything that the podcast has covered, go do that, and then you can resume the episode. Gentlemen, in preface for this episode, I told you that at the end of Rhythm of War, actually in the middle of the Rhythm of War, Shallan is given a Sion. Do you remember this? Do you remember Shallan given a Sion in a box to talk to Mraize of the Ghostbloods? Yeah. She talks through a Sion with Mraize of the Ghostbloods. Having read Elantris, what have we learned about Sions?
This is another one of those reveals that's informative, but I feel like it's not as shocking as maybe it should be.
I was underwhelmed.
I don't know if underwhelmed is the word I would use. It's just not, it doesn't reshape how I think about the Cosmere.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, oh, okay, that's what a Sion is. Cool.
Yeah. It's almost, it's different, but it's akin to like them having an aviary.
Yeah.
right? Like they have another magic thing from another planet. It's not shattering, but it is really, really cool to know that, I guess. One thing your question was, what do we know about Seons? One thing I think of is, and I guess this is also similar for aviaries, right? It's kind of like an ownership, right? It's like it's Rayaden's Sion or so and so's Sion, right? Is that Mraze's Sion? I mean, it doesn't actually matter for anything. I don't think. Like, it doesn't matter who he reports to or is allied with, But I'm just trying to think of things that we know about Sions. Sions in general, I thought were neat, but it felt like to me, it felt like the older technology of like a Spren or something in general. I think I wrote in our outline, let's see, how did I word this? I said it seems like a more one-dimensional Spren or a cross between Spren and a butler. It seems like more of a servant kind of style of thing. More like an iPad. I don't know.
Here's your World Hopper question.
Okay.
Is a Sion a Spren? Do those translate 1-to-1? If you brought a Sion to Roshar, would people be like, no, that's a Spren? Why are you calling it a Sion? Are they the same thing?
Are people going to say that on Roshar? I bet 100% yes.
Right.
They're going to see that, and to them, they're going to think, oh, clearly that's a Spren. Are they the same thing? I don't know if I'd go that far. Are they beings kind of powered in the same way? Seems like it. It seems like we've got splinters of investiture or pockets of investiture, however you want to think about that have latched onto some element of personality or sapience, sentience. Pick your word. It's a bit of investiture that has taken on rational thought.
I agree with Elliot. I think this is different from a Spren, but I do think people on Roshar would be like, "Oh, interesting Spren you have there."
Right.
They seem to perform. Obviously, there's some different functions of it. It's not like the whole bonding thing is different. This feels different from the Nile bond. If I'm getting into the nitty gritty, I don't think they're like transformative like the Spren are. Maybe with shard blades and plate and things like that. It doesn't feel like it's transformative. It doesn't seem like it gives you powers. It feels more akin to like an AVR for me of like it's something it's more of your personal assistant. It's Alexa. It's go tell this person this or do this or things like this. It's more of an ally than like a cognitive force, I guess. I don't know what else to describe it as, but
it's another concept that I'm really interested in an Elantris 2 and an Elantris 3 is now that the Cosmere is well established, revisiting Elantris with all of these new definitions that not only us, that Brandon Sanderson now knows in his head. Like when he wrote Elantris, he had a concept for the Cosmere. He wasn't sure if he was putting Elantris in the Cosmere at the time. So he kind of like retroactively put Elantris in the Cosmere. So then with post Stormlight 5, revisiting Elantris with all these new terms and new concepts and new, Cosmere stuff, I think is really interesting.
I do think Sions in particular, I'd be curious to see where we went with it. Because, on Roshar, we discovered Spren, and then we've slowly discovered kind of more and more about Spren, about their cultures, about their different ways of life, about how these shard blades are actually murdered Spren that we're using for our own purposes. Those kinds of like ethical, debatey type, discoveries. I'd be curious if an enlightened cell would examine Seons. Are they actually imprisoned, or are they more artificial intelligence, personal assistant kind of thing, where it's more program than it is a person? Like, where are the lines? Because I feel like on Roshar we're going more person in the Spren world.
Yeah.
But what are Seons? They don't seem to go that. They seem to exist simply to serve, like your computer might, sitting in front of you, kind of thing. So where would it go?
Interesting.
Okay, one way I want to take this, unless y'all have other thoughts on Seons specifically. So, talking about Seons, I would like to briefly talk about Aeon Door, or this like magic system here.
Yeah. I have a question for you guys around Aeon Door, but
go right ahead.
Okay.
If you have it, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a claim and then a question. Comparing Aeon Door and the Elantrians to the rest of the Cosmere, the Elantrians are the most powerful magic system we have. Would you agree or disagree?
All right, wait.
Hard.
I'm claiming the Elantrians are the most powerful magic wielders in the Cosmere that we know about. With one problem. You have to be on Elantris to do it, right? Aeon Door only works when you draw Elantris. And it's really Elantris dependent, so you got to be on Elantris. But with that small caveat, they're really powerful, right? Would you agree with that?
Okay, I will. I have thoughts. So one, I think the variety, like the amount of tools they have in their tool belt, is really good evidence towards your claim, and I would kind of agree. I don't know if I could say that it's the most powerful. I feel like I didn't get a great sense, and I think this is where book 2 and book 3 would be great. I don't know that, like, we don't see the Aeon Door in action until the end of the book.
Right.
And it's still new. Most people still can't use it. Like, it's not fully fleshed out. Like, I've seen a lot of stuff with the Mistborn friends, our Radiant friends. Like, we've seen a lot of crazy stuff, So I feel like it's hard for me to say. I feel like I don't have the evidence. I feel like there's not enough evidence right now to make that claim all the way. But I could definitely see the potential. I feel like a fully fleshed out Mistborn with like ATM would be pretty strong here, in comparison. But I don't. Yeah, I feel like I just haven't seen enough of it. But as far as tools in the tool belt and like sheer strength when done right, I could definitely put some weight in your claim, but I can't confidently stand on that right now, given just all the other things we've seen. I mean, Dalinar opening a perpendicularity, like there's a lot of crazy stuff. Which maybe
that's child's
easy.
play.
That's fair. Draw some lines. Yeah. I will say, or actually, Elliot, if you have anything to add, go ahead first. I'm going off on another note.
I'll just add quickly. I think you're right. I think I need to see an expert Aeon Door user before I can answer your question, because when I think of things like Dalinar opening perpendicularity, exactly what I was thinking. Dalinar plus a whole bunch of radiance and the seemingly infinite power you can draw, like directly open up a portal to the spiritual realm and just dump investiture out of it into your enemy. And I feel like that's going to mow down a lot of Aeon Door users, but I don't know that we've seen the full potential. Aeon Door does seem like another one of those, you're cracking into something really powerful. Maybe.
I think that the Elantrians, like as a race, seem to be the strongest like race, definitely, because it's kind of like their whole thing, I guess, is being really good at everything and being able to do anything kind of effortlessly. My side note that I mentioned earlier is I think the Aeon Door and I think the magic system here, I think it might be my favorite, at least aesthetically. I think visually it's like the coolest to me. I absolutely love this whole like
Imagine,
I don't know.
imagine on screen swashbuckling magic. That's just what this is.
Yes.
You're just
Yeah.
slashing golden
Mhm.
light into the air.
Like I mentioned, the options you have, like I feel like I couldn't tell you all the options because I know there's a lot, but I know that there's a lot of Aeons, and I assume they all kind of do different things, right? So I feel like there's a lot of things that can be in place, and all these, I just can picture all these like symbols being drawn. I almost get a picture, and this I'm glad we're behind the spoilers now. This actually isn't a major spoiler at all, but it felt a little bit akin to Yumi to me, of just kind of like this artistic style involved with the magic system, which I think is really cool, and I think would look excellent in a visual adaptation. I think that like I don't know, like I think the visuals of this are fantastic. I would love to see it. I get kind of this. It's not a calligraphy style, but I kind of get this like, you know, we see in Hope of Elantris and all these others, like they have children like practicing these Aeons, and I kind of get a vision on Earth of like kind of the beautiful like Chinese characters and symbols and things like that, like a beauty in these characters, a beauty in the magic system, kind of an elegance alongside like focused practice and precision is just awesome. I think that's awesome. I think that's beautiful. That's kind of how I've kind of pictured it. It was these like gorgeous symbols, even though it's more of like a map, but you know.
Do you remember what design tells Yumi when she looks at her Cosmere spirit web?
Like that she has a ton of power or whatever.
Yeah, she's like, you're glowing brighter than an Elantrian is her is her phrase. And you compared it, and that's why I thought of it. You compared Yumi and Elantris, and I agreed with you for a second, but I actually disagree with you. Because Elantris is like, Raoden spends the entire book missing one line on his Aeon. Like that's the thing at the end of the book, is you're missing the chasm that's changed the landscape, so you have to include it in the symbol for the Aeon door to react. In Yumi, it doesn't matter how good your bamboo is, right? Like that's the whole point. That's is true. It can be utilitarian. You just have to have the intent of turning you into bamboo. Okay, that works. Great. Moving on. In Elantris, they talk about it specifically. Intent is required. You have to be purposely trying to do this Aeon for it to work, but it has to be exact. It's a science. It's a math. It has to be. It's either correct or it's wrong, and there is no in between with Aeons.
And think about the Emperor's Soul as well. Think about Shai and the precision of her stamps that she's carving, and how it won't work if it's not perfect, and she has to redo it over and over and over until it's perfect. And I think there's a note on this in like the little Hoyd afternote at the end of the book, where he even mentions it's a world of precision. Precision is the key word.
Did you guys catch the one time devotion is mentioned in the book?
I don't think I did. I had to go look up afterwards by picking up the Arcanum about it. And I'm like, wait a second, what shard are we dealing with here? And lo and behold, there's two.
There are two, Dominion and Devotion, which are mentioned for the first time in a Stormlight letter, which is how we learned the names of those. But Devotion is called by name by not Hrathen, his demon buddy. What's his name?
Delof.
Delof.
Delof, yeah.
Delof worships Devotion. he just drops the name Devotion as a substitute for whatever the name that they usually use is. And Dominion is never mentioned in the book. So we have 2 shards. Both have been dead long before this story. So, do you guys remember what happens when a shard dies? Like, what, just as a Cosmere, like, mechanic standpoint, what happens when a shard dies?
Doesn't the investiture like scatter?
Yeah, it kind of just like
disperse?
it kind of just dumps everywhere. So
Mhm.
on Elantris, investiture is everywhere. They just have to draw the right symbol in order to channel it, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And then on
So
like
that's-
Threnody, the investiture is everywhere, and it's killer spread and killing everybody, right? Like
Mhm.
that's how it is used.
Yeah. Okay, so this I'm really glad we're talking about this. This was my biggest question that I wanted to talk about with y'all, because this is like, we just did Mistborn. It was my reread, so I've known about Ruin and Preservation for a while now.
Yeah.
I've known about our Roshar shards. These are new. These are the new ones, and I'm super excited to talk about this. This is like, feels like it's my birthday, talking about brand new shards, that we see but don't see. This is my biggest question. I'm just like, I want to know everything about it. You're right. Dominion isn't mentioned, and if you asked me before we started talking about this, I remember I'd seen the name Dominion mentioned somewhere. It must have been in Stormlight. I don't know. At some point, maybe I saw it somewhere. So my guess was that I thought Elantris had one shard, and I thought it was the shard of Dominion. But I was looking for it throughout the story, and I couldn't really find anything. I was just like, okay, cool. Moving on. So Dominion and Devotion. Do we know anything else other than these were the shards that were there and they're now dead? And we assume Devotion is the Aeon Door, I guess.
Yeah, let me briefly read their Coppermine page. Dominion is a shard of Adonalsium briefly held by... Is this a spoiler for you? No. Dominion is a shard of Adonalsium once held by Skai. Skai. I don't know. I don't recognize that name either. After the shattering, she traveled to Cell with Devotion, where both were splintered by Odium. Since Dominion was destroyed well before any other known events on Cell, it is somewhat unclear exactly how the shard's intent would drive its vessel to act. The only trace of her are her splinters. Ooh, is this a spoiler? What is this? Skays. What are these? Which are thirsty for power as a result of their relationship with the shard and driven to maintain influence over their politics of Fjordell. This suggests that Dominion's focus was amassing and maintaining control over others. What's a skays?
Where did this info come from?
That's a great question. Arcanum Unbounded, the Cellish system. Is Skaze, Skaze, in that excerpt, Elliot?
I don't recall it.
The Skaze have many similarities to Seons that also live on Cell. Like these Seons, they appear as sapient floating spheres of energy that can converse with humans. Unlike the Seons, however, the Skaze are very rarely seen or discussed in Erelon.
Very rarely seen or discussed. I don't remember any mention of that, but
Oh,
it's
it
very
is briefly,
possible.
yeah.
I missed the I missed the Devotion name drop. So
Yeah, it's like one sentence on the Seons and the Skays, who are self-aware investiture, splinters left behind on the planet Cell.
okay. Let's see what's on the Devotion page. Ooh, a pretty art of Aona. Devotion is a shard originally held by Aona. After the shattering, she traveled to Cell, splintered by Odium. As Devotion was splintered far in Cell's prehistory, it's unknown how precisely her intent would have manifested. She appears to wish to care for people and provide them safety from pain and harm. This is devotion. Though not as directly hostile to each other as preservation and ruin, good thing we just read Mistborn, devotion and dominion are at some level opposite to each other, yet their powers work together as the door. Devotion and odium can also be argued to be opposite of each other.
Question for you then. If devotion is kind of this note, somewhat a note of protecting people it mentioned, like some capacity, do you think that's tied to these monks and them having like metal in their skin or whatever? We don't really get answers to that. I imagine a book 2 and book 3 would dive into that, which would be kind of cool. And maybe
they have metal in their bodies?
I'm thinking. Not metal in their bodies, but it talks about them being like hard, right? Like right?
I noted this in my notes, and now I was second guessing myself as well.
Altering thing or something. Sorry to cut you off. Something like that.
You're good. You're good. I did write in my notes that there's talk of the Dakor monks having metal embedded in their bodies, which I, of course, keyed in on because we've just finished reading Mistborn Era 1. But now I'm doubting myself. Was that literal or was it figurative? Because they talked about the way they would like reshape their bones and how they're all twisted in weird forms and hardened.
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought.
Literal
it was.
Metal, or is it like it's hard as metal?
Yeah, I thought it like just hulked them up. I didn't think it put metal into their bodies.
My understanding.
Go would key into that.
I don't know. That's probably going to be a question for Elantris too. My thought is either way, their like skeletal structure is like altered.
Right.
Like they go to Dakor monk boot camp training school for monks, and they come out different. They come out like physically different, with like skeletal structure, whether it's metal or if it's just additional or shifted or moved bones or what. It's definitely different. And so that was the only thing I feel like I could key into is potentially an additional like level of
I think it might
be here at play here behind the scenes.
I think it might be figurative. I think I found the paragraph I was referencing in my notes, and it says, "They were bare-chested, their eyes seemed to burn. They looked like men, but their flesh was ridged and disfigured, as if a carved piece of metal had somehow been inserted beneath the skin." That's like the perception at first is, oh man, it looks like he's got a bunch of metal embedded in. But I think it's explained kind of as we go that they have some way of painfully reshaping their bones.
Okay.
Yeah. And it talks like in those fight sequences, isn't it? It points out like it's like hard, like you like like what
like carapace?
Keine, kind of sorta. Like Keine like swings his huge weapon into them, and it like doesn't really go in. Like
right.
it gets in, but like barely. It's almost like having thick armor or carapace, right? So yeah, so I'm like, is that somehow some kind of weird ruin hemalurgy style of like a magic system at play of protecting the monks by this kind of skeletal alteration? Who knows? Maybe. I don't know.
Elliot, you have Hoyd in your outline.
Hoyd's in the book.
Hoyd's in the book. The end.
Yeah, that was basically it.
Paul, I mean, all three of us listened to the audiobook, so I assume we all got the bonus Hoyd epilogue, right?
Yes.
Okay. So he leaves Elantris, or disappears, I should more accurately say, with a Sion. He's got a Sion buddy, right? Am I right? Am I correct in that?
I think so.
Via the lake, the mountain lake. Do you guys want to talk about the mountain lake?
I instantly, the very first time Galadon and Raoden, I think it's the two of them that get there first, find the pool of water on the mountainside, I went perpendicularity. Although
I did think of that, yeah.
I doubted myself later because we've been trained at this point by Trevor to suspect pools of water to be perpendicularities. But we've also maybe been led to believe that a perpendicularity needs to tie to a shard or a vessel or have a power source, perhaps. Dalinar can open one, but that's just because he's a bondsmith. If our shards are dead, is it a perpendicularity? Is it just like residual perpendicularity from when they were active? It sure seems like a perpendicularity. People disappear into it.
Right. Let me go ahead and just confirm this for you. It is a perpendicularity. The guy that they send through, the crazy old Elantrian dude, is the lighthouse keeper in Oathbringer. Do you remember Rhino? The double I, Rhino. Rhino. He's an old Elantrian dude and gets sent through the portal by Raoden and Galadon.
Okay, wait, hold on. In that case, shouldn't it be pronounced Re-Eno?
Yeah, yes. You are correct.
Or wait, no,
like
that's no. It'd be Rhino. Never mind. Because it's always the long vowel sounds.
Well, it's Keine, so it'd be Rhino.
Yeah.
Right? Keine, Rhino.
Sure.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Rhino. Lighthouse guy in Oathbringer.
Okay.
There you go.
Wow.
He's met Raoden and Galadon, if only briefly.
I have a side note that I love reading these other Brandon Sanderson books, and I love making the Cosmere connections. However, I can never point them out because they don't say a recognizable name. It's a description, and I'm like, dang it, who has a scruffy beard and white hair? I don't know.
There was a stranger with a mark on his left side of his cheek, and he was a little pale skinned. Okay, who is that? Flip.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I don't have the retention to remember the descriptions of all of our characters.
Yeah,
and so that's when I'm like, dang, I'm lost. But I feel like there's so much more. So thank you for that.
So that one was confirmed at a signing in 2018 or something. That there's no way you can get that, but besides asking the man himself.
Do you think Brandon Sanderson didn't actually mean to, but then someone asked and it made sense, and he was like,
"Sure,
absolutely, that was exactly what I was trying to do there. That little Easter egg for you,
No, I can answer this in more detail after we read Secret History. We will reconvene on that in a month.
Sounds good.
Speaking of other stories in Arcanum Unbounded, did you guys read The Hope of Elantris?
Yes.
What did you think of that?
I think you're. Go ahead, Elliot, if you had something.
I finished Elantris, and as we've talked, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a ton of fun. It has some flaws, as we've talked, but I came out of it on a high. I was really enjoying it, and so I was super eager to jump into Hope of Elantris. I was like, oh, there's more. Let's go. And it's in Arcanum Unbounded, which I kind of equated to, Secrets of the Cosmere. What am I going to unlock? What am I going to learn that's going to blow my mind? Crossover. You mentioned this at the beginning, Trevor. There's not really a whole lot of crossover in Elantris proper. There's not surprise showings of characters. There probably is. Someone's going to jump in and be like, oh, you missed these 6 characters that actually showed up, which I would believe 100%. But I jump into Hope of Elantris, and there's not really much there. Not to take away from it, because it has a really sentimental backstory that he explains in the postscript. And so when I finally got to that, I was like, oh, that's sweet. But the actual story itself was kind of like, All right, I was expecting way more because it was an Arcanum Unbounded.
Well, okay, I hate to break this to you, but the publication date of Hope of Elantris is January 2006.
Okay.
4 months after Elantris and before his second book, which would be The Final Empire. So there isn't much else to tie it to when it's published.
Well, I didn't know that. Opening it up.
That does make more sense. I agree with you, Elliot. I also was looking for something big. It's funny because I read it twice because I read it and then we're like, yeah, we're gonna cover it. We're gonna talk about it on the podcast, and I'm like, we are? Okay, what did I miss? And so I went back and reread it. I will say, I mean, it's kind of another moment of just kind of a good, feel good story. So we're covering Matisse, who Elliot mentioned, kind of a sentimental or a special attachment, I guess, that Brandon Sanderson had. His now wife, whenever they were dating, had a student who did a book report on Elantris and loved it, and it was just a super in-depth, well-done report, way over the top, and he was just honored. So he wanted to write her into a story, and wrote this story to kind of give her a place in the Cosmere, which is really, really cool. It's a good story, and I think one of the, neat things, I guess, to point out is, so we're following Matisse, who saves all these children and just exhibits a lot of heroism. Elliot mentioned it's kind of like an interlude. I think that's pretty spot on. It's like, okay, while our other characters are out doing their other stuff, this kind of gives some perspective into the like average person in New Elantris during this time, One thing that I think is neat is the Matisse, Ash, I think, is talking to Raoden or Galadon or someone at the end of the book, end of the short story, and says that, after everything was said and done, Matisse got a Sion, and they wanted to give her Sion. They were hoping she would get Sion Ati, in the name Matisse, which stands for hope, and the story here is Hope of Elantris. But she doesn't. She actually gets Sion
Ayo,
meaning bravery, and I just thought that was a neat way. It's simple, it's sweet, and it's part of the reason why I liked Elantris so much, was just a good, sweet theme of bravery from a normal person, standing up and being brave in the face of danger that she can't combat, And so I think it was a sweet story, but Yeller, you're absolutely right. There's nothing really to draw from this. No big Cosmere moment. Just a nice little, okay, sweet, neat. I'm gonna go read Mistborn Era 2 now, but that was really sweet of you, Brandon.
You say that. I guarantee you somebody out there has a huge, massive, complex theory that ties something from Hope of Elantris into their explanation of the end of Stormlight 10. Guarantee it. If you are that person out there listening, drop it in our YouTube comments. I would love to hear your crazy theory that you built on Hope of Elantris.
I absolutely agree. We've been spinning big stuff off of Elantris this whole time. I definitely want to see and hear the craziest Hope of Elantris spin-off theories, crazy things that can happen. That'd be a good Reddit thread right there. All
right, gentlemen. I've got one more topic before we close this episode. Something that I've realized or dawned on me as I was reading Elantris. Early Brandon Sanderson seems to focus quite a bit, like Elantris, Warbreaker, Mistborn, and like maybe the first 2 books of Stormlight. I would classify as like early Brandon Sanderson. Okay? All of those books focus fairly heavily on a religious intrigue or a political intrigue, or both, right? Like, the Well of Ascension is all about politics and getting this army on your side, that army on your side. Elantris is all about manipulating the other religion onto each other. Warbreaker is all about god kings and their court. Like, the entire thing is both a political intrigue and a religious intrigue. Modern day Sanderson, I feel like he's kind of dropped that. I feel like a lot of more recent Sanderson books, and maybe you guys can more accurately answer this after you've read Secret Projects and Mistborn Era 2, because all those titles are a lot more recent. But from the recent titles that you guys have read, namely Oathbringer, Rhythm of War, Yumi would be the three most recent. They're a lot more character driven. They're character studies as opposed to like politics and religion intrigues and stuff like that. Like, there's still elements of those, certainly, but I wouldn't call Yumi and the Nightmare Painter a religious intrigue, even though there's religion in it. It's a character story. What do you guys enjoy that shift, or do you? I don't know how I feel about it. I just observed that there's a lot more politics in early Sanderson books, and he kind of drops it in later Sanderson books.
I feel like I'm onto what you're talking about for sure. I think you're onto something. I think it could be. I'm sure there's a lot of different possible explanations. We'd have to hear from the man himself, maybe, to get an explanation. It could be maybe he finished exploring those kinds of topics and has moved on to other things, or maybe it's he intentionally made a shift from more political or religious into character, like on purpose. I don't know. I do think, as I'm thinking about what the books you're listing, maybe the anomaly in your list though is the Way of Kings.
Okay, yeah. Oh, and actually, the Final Empire goes against my theory as well. The Final Empire is very heisty. There's a lot less politics. It's a single straight line story. It's not until you get to the second two books that are political intrigues or whatever. So the Final Empire and the Way of Kings go against my theory, but other than that, it's pretty general.
Yeah, and I feel Words of Radiance perhaps has some politics that start to come into play. I'm thinking of Shallan at the court with like all the high princes and trying to play them against each other and things like that.
Yep.
But Way of Kings particularly jumps out to me as a very character driven in a lot of ways.
So I would say I think it's woven in those other stories. Like Rhythm of War has a huge moment in Shadesmar and the whole like trial scene there. And that's a pretty big focal point of the book. But you're right, that's not like the primary like story at hand, right? It's more of like an element involved. So I have a bit of thoughts on this, and I've really had a lot of thoughts this whole night, so bear with me. So I kind of agree. I think Elliot sort of mentioned this, or briefly mentioned this whole like. I feel like he's kind of gone through that topic. I feel like Brandon Sanderson is very good at writing these. I think what makes these things different, what makes this political, religious, dramatic intrigue good is the dialogue, the cleverness, things like that. If it was just kind of like a mystery, but I think the cleverness of Brandon Sanderson's writing is what really makes that interesting. I can definitely say that if the characters and the dialogue and stuff wasn't so well written, it would not hold my attention. I wouldn't enjoy it if it was kind of cheesy or predictable or things like that. But I feel like if that is the, I don't know this. I don't have any basis to stand on, but I feel that if you kept writing these styles of books, you would kind of run out.
Yeah.
Not maybe run out as strong. I would also say that you couldn't do this for an extended series primarily. I feel like you would get a lot of bad middle book syndromes with the middle books or anything like that. I feel like it wouldn't work too well, personally. I'm sure there's good stuff out there. Um, but that's my feeling. I will say I was also going to really hammer home this whole like the dialogue, the writing, the character like scripted interactions are what make these good. That's kind of a given with Brandon Sanderson books. Like he writes his dialogue and his conversations between characters so well, they interact together so well that later you have, you know, like that's just kind of an understood part of all these, like in Yumi and Rhythm of War and all these other books, you know. But as far as my feelings toward it, in general, I enjoy the more character study side better, the Yumi type book where you're following a character and it's just very notable how that character is and how they're going to like following that character's progression, I guess. Elantris was unique. It felt like their characters were kind of our protagonists. It felt like they were kind of above the story and like they're just kind of above the reproach of like never giving up, never really. They faced adversity, but they never really were deeply affected by adversity. I mean, they show some signs, but it's, I don't know, it's different. The others, you know, Oathbringer, you know, Yumi, like you see the struggle and the heartache of the characters. It's vulnerable and you kind of put yourself in the character's shoes and you sit next to them and you sympathize. Whereas here it feels like you're following along like your heroes kind of thing in Elantris and seeing what they do and you're like, that's amazing, that's inspiring, and I really like them, you know. But the other, it's like you're beside them and you want to root for them. This doesn't answer your question at all. I'm really just spouting thoughts here. I really am. So
with what you said, I rated Elantris. I rated the plot of Elantris 5, but I put an asterisk next to it on purpose. The plot of Raoden picking himself up and like getting back on top is a 10 out of 10. The plot of Serene trying to fight for Arelon, even though it's not her country, 10 out of 10. The greater plot of like Hrathen's nation trying to take over, I don't care. So the greater plot of Elantris, like the political intrigue part of Elantris, 2 out of 10 for me. I don't care. But like the scenes that we actually get are really good. I averaged a 5 out of 10 between a 10 out of 10 like story of in Elantris trying to make the best of what you can, and then the overall plot of some war that I don't care about. 1 out of 10.
That's fair. Honestly.
Anything else, gentlemen?
I think we covered it. I think Elantris, I think, is going to hold a kind of special place in my Cosmere ratings or takes or whatever you want to say, because I think I'm now going to go around telling people that Elantris is underrated and that people need to give it a second chance. Has its flaws. I think Brandon has clearly honed his talent going forward from this, but man, the elements are here, the characters are here. It's a good book.
I made the claim to our patrons in our live reactions, and I said I would say it in the episode, so I need to. Elantris is better than Mistborn Era 1.
I think I'm on that boat with you.
In its entirety, I would agree.
Okay.
Hero of Ages is really, really good.
Okay.
So that makes it hard. But the entirety of Mistborn, like definitely if I were going to look at the two options and say like I want to read one of these two options, I would choose to read Elantris again. That is also maybe not fair given we just finished Mistborn and I mean I also just finished Elantris, but I've read Mistborn twice anyways. I really enjoyed talking about this whole book. I have one last thought that I want to talk about, Trevor, because
Yeah.
what you were saying about the plot, I have an idea, and this is really just a what if this was maybe different, would the plot have been better? Do you think so I kind of agree with you that the whole like like the character, what's going on with Raoden zoomed in, and what's going on with Serene, and Serene's story is made good in part because of her butting up against Hrathen. I think that could still happen. But what if the main evil wasn't necessarily this like group of monks that's invading that you're not blindsided by, but like you're kind of I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic there. You know they're going to invade, but whatever. I didn't necessarily love that either. What if it was more of like, what if the adversity or the big evil was more so like threats and trials in Elantris? There were a lot of trials in Elantris when Raoden is there, and there's all these other gangs and things like that. Like they did a pretty good job of setting that up. But what if there was like more big bad, large scale evil in Elantris? And I feel like you'd kind of have a bigger breakthrough, or maybe a bigger Sanderlanche of like Raoden and his crew are kind of having to dive around. They're still recruiting people, but they're still more so under persecution. They kind of get to a point where they're just sitting pretty. Like they're just kind of kings of Elantris and can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But I feel like it would have been maybe more, I don't know, more intense and stuff if there were like ever-present threats throughout in Elantris, and kind of that breakthrough is like, I guess, defeating that. That is a very like stereotypical story of like, just overcoming the bad guy at the end, but that's still kind of what happened. But the bad guy just wasn't really present there for a long time. It kind of didn't mesh, and I can agree with your thoughts and ratings on that, but I feel like maybe if there was something like that, maybe a more Elantris bound major evil at present,
Yeah.
that it would maybe be more, maybe it would be better. Maybe the plot would roll a bit smoother, a bit nicer, in my opinion. I am a horrible writer, so I feel silly like offering like this may have made a better point in the story. I never do that. I never want to do that, but that's my thoughts on this. So you don't have to agree or disagree, but those are my thoughts, and I just had to say it before we wrap this episode up. In conclusion, great book. I'll be anxiously awaiting book 2 whenever that may happen one day. So
Sounds good. Should we set an all-time high for our record length and go for a Stormlight review, or should we wrap it up here?
2 hours isn't enough for you? 2.5?
Yeah, we're at 2:11 right now.
nice. We can if you would like to. I think this is a good little blanket end to our Elantris. Maybe we can pick those up next time. But
Sounds good. We can. So moving forwards, I know I've said this, but I'm going to say it again. We're going back to Mistborn for Mistborn Secret History. The 3 episodes on Mistborn Secret History, a Stormlight Current episode, and then into Mistborn Era 2 after that. So we're reading parts 1 and 2 of Mistborn Secret History next week, and we will do a Stormlight review then. Anything else, gentlemen?
Not here.
All right. Thanks for joining me. We will see you all next week.
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.